the history of this institution itself, that McGill University was built and established with the unpaid, unslaved labor of Black and Indigenous people. The buildings we work and learn in, the wealth that sustained this university, are inseparable from those histories of dispossession and exploitation. For me, as a Black student leader, this is not an abstract fact. It shapes how I understand my presence here, not as a gift from an institution, but as the result of generations of struggle, organizing, and insisting that we belong in and that we have the right to transform these spaces. McGill has been institutionally celebrating Black History Month for 9 years, but Black people have been marking this month and every month on this campus long before there were official posters and websites. For decades, Black students have resisted isolation, built community, and created spaces of care and political imagination, from early associations that challenge racism on campus to the Black Students Network, which has become a home base for Black, African, and Caribbean students across faculties. As BSN, we are part of this long continuum. In recent years, our work has included pushing for more equitable funding structures, launching a structured funding pilot to support Black-led initiatives, and partnering with groups like the Quebec Black Medical Association to expand mentorship pathways into health professions. These efforts are about more than just programming. They're about building institutional memory and ensuring that Black student-led initiatives do not have to start from scratch every time a new cohort arises. While Black leadership has often been born out of necessity rather than privilege, it remains a powerful force on this campus. We are especially fortunate to have an administration that has moved beyond statements of support to truly engage with this leadership, work alongside it, and organize and recognize its importance within the life of this university. So as we begin tonight's conversation, one step back, two steps forward, I invite us to hold both truths at once: the burden of history and the power of the infrastructures we're building together so that Black futures at McGill are not precarious, but rooted. A few practical notes before we move into the program. Please take a moment now to turn off your cell phones. We kindly ask that you do not take any pictures and videos during the keynote. We have a professional photographer and videographer and are live streaming the event, and we want to give them the space to do their work without any disruption. If at any point you need more food or a drink, please feel free to do so quietly. Help yourself from the side tables during the event. The venue is wheelchair accessible, elevators are available, and there is an accessible washroom on this floor. Thank you for helping us make this a respectful, accessible, and welcoming space. It is now my honor to invite Elder Ghana Sohen Kevin Deere to open up our evening. Elder Deere is a respected Ganya knowledge keeper whose presence reminds us that conversation about Black freedom, repair, and futurity must always be in relations to Indigenous sovereignty and ongoing struggles for land and life. Please join me in welcoming Elder Kevin Deere.
Agwego wat kunwarado. Tsiniti dakana raje. Agwego tsanuni. Yogo da garide. Nana da shatore te agodigina jerzi tuniot. Igo ostawa kawi ne da wana dunki yetini sta hoza. Nezi tsiniti chudaso zimzade zinore wani zarade se agwego got kon aja agwego nhodi yogot sa chade wani zarage. Tane yatana jodukte. Nana dasa tungawro anagon hoda garunya gwego seguna ne tunizero dio dajanioni tana gonekari wanata chata winizarage oneksi tayada wadenu muradu tanu segu tuni dawayerha wa winizarade kuyane kuyane Guyane, 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 yo-ho. So welcome everyone. As I'm looking around, we're all seemingly good mind, good health, good spirit. And we ask ourselves, why is that? This snapping turtle that I carry represents Mother Earth, represents my creation story, represents Turtle Island. We're all at the bosom of one common mother. And she gives us everything, unconditional love from the beginning of time. And the only thing she asks of us is return, to honor her, to love her, to respect her, and whatever we take, we give something back, we cooperate, we share, we work together, and all of us have a responsibility to those faces that didn't come out of the earth yet, that when they will be born, they will inherit a happy, safe, clean, beautiful, peaceful, loving home. And if you look how we're trashing this great mother of us, you can see that we have so much work to do on so many levels. But we're here, and together, equally, we can make it better. Now, this is what we call the supreme law of the land. Because when those people came across the great salt water to our house, they saw all this pristine Garden of Eden. So much trees and animals and everything. And the first thing was, hey, we're going to get that. And the first thing our people said, well, before we do that, what do we need to know about you? Oh, they said, we're coming with God and his son Jesus. We said, all right, tell us that story. And when they got done, our answer said, hey, there's only one source of life for all life. So you know what? We're going to smoke the peace pipe. We're going to create a treaty that's going to endure as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the water flows. Us in our canoe, and you in your big ship. And we shouldn't have a problem. We all know what happened, right? You just have to look at the sad history, and it's like this. Everything is out of whack because of this idea of superiority. We're superior to you, so we're going to subjugate you. We're going to put you on a reserve. We're going to take all your land and resources. And you're not going to have a say about it because might is right. And a lot of us have experienced the brunt of that. But you know what's happening? Our Earth Mother is telling us, come on, wake up. The animals are coming in all white, holy, pure, telling us, wake up. The land, the air is contaminated because all these things are telling us we better wake up. Because if we don't, we'll all be gone in a very short period of time. So I tell people, you know what? We're alive, it's great. But all of us, we all have to begin to see different. We all have to begin to hear different. We all have to begin to speak different. And together, equally, we better start doing different. Because if not, we'll all be gone in a very short period of time. Global warming and climate change is real. You just have to look right now. All the potholes I had to maneuver in my car because of the hot and the cold, the hot and the cold, the hot and the cold. If it would just stay cold, we wouldn't have all of this. So everything is about relationship. Peace, friendship, and respect, and in between peace, friendship, and respect. Even though this was made with our people and this said would endure as long as the sun shines, grass grows, this is a universal law that everybody could follow. Because if there did, there'd be love, there'd be peace, there'd be harmony, we'd be singing and dancing. And that future generations coming wouldn't be in jeopardy now because we'd all understand what is our roles, duties, and responsibilities. So you just heard this little boy drum sound his voice. There's water in here. When we sing our songs, we acknowledge all the oceans, the streams, the lakes, the rivers, and the rain, because if there's no water, we ain't eating. So from there is going to come all the trees and the plants. Then the animals, they eat that, then we eat the animals. And everything is held together by natural law. And then when we're born, we're all given that sacred breath. And then now we all sound their voice and how beautiful it is. So to all you beautiful people, I thank you for giving me this time to come into your lives for this little short period of time. And I hope whatever I said made you feel good in spite of it all. We're here to sing and dance and be happy because nobody's guaranteed tomorrow. All we have is now. So with that, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Nyawen, thank you so much, Elder Deer, for grounding us and reminding us that our work is always a part of a much larger story on these lands. We will now hear a few words from someone whose work many of us encounter behind the scenes, but whose influence is deeply felt. I'd like to invite our new Provost and Executive Vice President Academic, Provost Angela Campbell, to speak about Black History Month at McGill and the commitments that must extend beyond February. Please join me in welcoming Provost Campbell to the stage.
Bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Thank you so much, Arlene. And thank you, Elder Geneso and Kevin Deere, for your generous words and for grounding us in reflection and responsibility. It's an honor to follow your opening, the words before all else, and to welcome everyone to this Black History Month 2026 here at McGill University for this keynote event. Black History Month is a time for recognition, but also for reckoning and for renewal. At McGill, and in Quebec and Canada more broadly, it invites us to reflect honestly on histories that have too often been sidelined or erased, and to acknowledge the enduring contributions of Black communities to scholarship, science, the arts, activism, and public life. It also challenges institutions like ours to confront how we have benefited from the inequitable systems and to act with clarity and accountability to dismantle them. McGill's commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion and to addressing anti-Black racism are grounded in this responsibility. These commitments are not symbolic. They require sustained institutional change in how we recruit, support, and retain Black students, staff, and faculty, in how knowledge is produced and valued, and in how power is shared and exercised within the university. We are making progress, but there's still much work to do. And while this progress matters, it's critical to remember how this progress came to be. Long before institutional recognition and the websites and the flyers that Orlane mentioned, Black organizers, scholars, students, and community activists pushed, often against obstinate resistance, for justice, visibility, and change. Their work reflects profound resilience and resistance. It must never be overlooked or absorbed quietly into institutional narratives. It's the bedrock upon which any meaningful progress at McGill rests, and we honor that legacy today. Je tiens également à souligner l'importance de ce moment dans un contexte plus large. Le mois de l'histoire des Noirs au Québec est le fruit des décennies de mobilisation communautaire et de leadership noir. À McGill, nous reconnaissons que notre responsabilité institutionnelle s'inscrit dans cette histoire plus vaste de lutte, de résilience et de transformation. Nous nous engageons à poursuivre ce travail avec humilité, rigueur et solidarité, en partenariat avec les communautés noires qui ont toujours été à l'avant-garde du changement. I want to close by offering my sincere thanks to Linda Belimo, Senior Advisor, Anti-Black Racism and Equity Education, to our equity team, and especially to our equity education colleagues who've put together this wonderful evening this evening, to Dean Yolande Chan for her leadership and her partnership on BHM 2026, but also well beyond BHM 2026, to the entire faculty, Desautels Faculty of Management, and to all the students, staff, faculty, and community partners who helped organize Black History Month at McGill this year. Your leadership, care, and vision make gatherings like this possible and meaningful. This evening, we're honored to hear from Sabaa Quao, an entrepreneur and business strategist whose work sits at the intersection of leadership, organizational culture, and equity-driven change. Drawing on both scholarship and professional practice, his contributions have shaped how institutions understand power, identity, and inclusion, not simply as abstract ideals, but as operational realities that influence decision-making and accountability. We are so grateful for the opportunity to engage with his work and to learn from his experience, and I thank him so much for being here. As we continue this evening, I encourage us all to listen deeply, to learn generously, and to carry what we hear beyond this room into our daily work at the university. Thank you so much for being here, and I wish you a wonderful, engaging evening.
Thank you, Provost Campbell, for your words and for your ongoing leadership in advancing equity at McGill as a shared institutional responsibility. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Senator Suze Yuans. Senator Yuans is a distinguished member of the Senate of Canada, appointed in 2020 to represent the province of Quebec. She has been a tireless advocate for Black communities, social justice initiatives, and equitable public policy, bringing a wealth of experience from her work in municipal affairs, community development, and federal-level advocacy. Her presence tonight highlights the vital connection between academic institutions and the broader societal efforts to advance inclusion and recognition of Black histories in Canada.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers collègues, chers amis, retenue par mes obligations à Ottawa, je ne peux pas être présente avec vous ce soir pour échanger de vive voix sur un sujet si intéressant, la disruption comme catalyseur. Nous nous penchons actuellement sur des projets de loi importants et hier, les séances parlementaires ont été suspendues à cause des événements tragiques survenus à Tumbler Ridge, en Colombie-Britannique, et à Kitigan, Zibé. Nos sympathies à tous nos concitoyens et concitoyennes touchés par ce drame. En tant qu'ingénieure et sénatrice, je navigue entre deux univers qui, à première vue, semblent très différents. L'un est fait de structures, de systèmes, de calculs et de modèles. L'autre est fait de débats, de politiques publiques, de relations humaines et de réalités sociales complexes. Pourtant, ces deux mondes se rejoignent ce soir autour de ce thème qui me parle profondément depuis que je l'ai découvert, la disruption comme catalyseur. Je dois vous avouer que lorsque j'ai reçu ce thème, j'ai fait ce que tout bon ingénieur fait devant un concept intriguant. J'ai fait une petite recherche. Et très vite, j'ai compris que la disruption n'est pas seulement un mot à la mode, c'est une force, une secousse, une rupture qui, lorsqu'elle est bien comprise, peut devenir un moteur de transformation. Et c'est là que mon esprit d'ingénieur a fait un lien inattendu, la théorie du chaos. Cette théorie nous enseigne que dans les systèmes complexes, qu'ils soient mécaniques, climatiques ou sociaux, de petites perturbations peuvent déclencher des changements majeurs. L'effet papillon, vous le connaissez, un battement d'ailes peut, en théorie, provoquer une tempête à l'autre bout du monde. En réfléchissant à mon propre parcours et à celui de tant de leaders noirs que nous célébrons pendant le mois de l'histoire des Noirs, j'ai réalisé que nous aussi, des battements d'ailes, des perturbations, nous sommes des disruptions. En écrivant ces lignes, j'ai repensé à mon cheminement. Je vois une succession de moments où j'ai dû sortir du cadre, déranger l'ordre établi, refuser les limites qu'on voulait m'imposer. Rien de spectaculaire. Parfois même des gestes minuscules. Poser une question que personne n'osait poser, occuper un espace où l'on ne m'attendait pas, persister malgré les doutes. Mais ces petites ruptures ont façonné ma trajectoire. Elles ont créé des bifurcations, des opportunités, des ouvertures. Et je sais que je ne suis pas la seule. Dans l'histoire de notre communauté, j'aimerais citer Claudette Colvin, décédée cette année, qui, avant Rosa Parks, par un simple refus de céder son siège dans un autobus, a déclenché un mouvement national. Viola Desmond, ici au Canada, a fait la même chose en s'asseyant dans un siège réservé aux Blancs. Wangari Maathai, que j'ai eu le privilège de rencontrer, a planté un arbre, puis un autre, puis des millions, transformant un pays et inspirant le monde. Jean-Augustine a porté la motion qui a fait du mois de l'histoire des Noirs une réalité au Canada, un geste politique qui a changé notre paysage culturel. Ce sont des gestes simples, mais dans un système instable, ils deviennent des forces tectoniques, pour utiliser des termes plus scientifiques. La théorie du chaos nous dit que les systèmes complexes ne changent pas de manière linéaire. Ils changent par saut, par rupture, par disruption. Et l'histoire des Noirs est faite de ces moments où une perturbation, un acte de courage, une parole, une création artistique, une mobilisation a provoqué un réarrangement profond de la société. Alors, que signifie la disruption comme catalyseur dans le cadre de la célébration du mois de l'histoire des Noirs? Cela signifie reconnaître que le progrès ne vient pas toujours des grandes réformes planifiées, mais souvent des gestes inattendus, des voix qui s'élèvent, des idées qui dérangent. Cela signifie accepter que le changement soit parfois chaotique, imprévisible, inconfortable, mais nécessaire. Cela signifie aussi honorer l'excellence, la créativité noire qui a toujours su transformer le chaos en innovation. Le jazz, le hip-hop, les mouvements sociaux, les avancées scientifiques et technologiques portés par des esprits qui ont refusé de suivre les chemins tracés. Et cela signifie enfin nous regarder nous-mêmes avec honnêteté, reconnaître que nous sommes chacun à notre manière des agents de perturbation, que notre présence dans certains espaces est déjà une disruption, que nos ambitions, nos réussites, nos rêves sont des catalyseurs. Ce soir, je veux donc vous inviter à embrasser cette idée. Nous sommes les battements d'ailes qui déclenchent les tempêtes de justice, d'innovation et de transformation. Et si la disruption est un catalyseur, alors le mois de l'histoire des Noirs est le moment idéal pour reconnaître notre pouvoir, honorer ceux qui l'ont exercé avant nous et inspirer ceux qui le porteront après nous. Merci. Mesdames et messieurs.
Merci. Thank you, Senator Yuans, for your inspiring and insightful remarks, your dedication to justice, and your commitment to amplifying Black voices, enrich our conversation, and reinforce the importance of continued partnership and action across all sectors. This year's keynote is presented in partnership with the Desautels Faculty of Management, and we're grateful for their continued support of Black History Month and equity-centered innovation more broadly. It is my pleasure to introduce the first Black dean the university has ever appointed and recently reappointed for a second mandate, Dr. Yolande Chen, Dean of the Desautels Faculty of Management, to offer remarks on behalf of our partner faculty. Please welcome Dean Chen.
Bonsoir, bienvenue. Je suis Yolande Brown Chan, Dean of the Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University, and it is indeed my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you all here for McGill's 2026 Black History Month keynote. You heard earlier that we are marking two important milestones today: the 9th official Black History Month at McGill and the 30th anniversary of Canada's recognition of Black History Month. This month is a time of reflection. It's also a call to responsibility. It invites us, all of us, to honor Black history's excellence and contributions, while also acknowledging honestly that the work remains unfinished. And that is especially important right now, at this point in time. Because among many contexts, here and around the world, we are seeing growing resistance to efforts that address anti-Black racism. Long-standing equity initiatives are being rolled back. Research, funding, and even language related to equity and inclusion. All of this is increasingly under scrutiny and is being challenged. This reminds us that progress is not linear, and it's precisely why moments like Black History Month matter, perhaps more now than even 10 years ago. Anti-Black racism has real consequences for people, for institutions, for the social systems we're part of and that we shape. And acknowledging and addressing the historical and sadly ongoing barriers faced by descendants of enslaved peoples remains a shared responsibility. As a Black academic and dean, I feel this responsibility keenly. And at Desautels Faculty of Management, we collectively take this responsibility seriously. Our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion is embedded in how we think about leadership at the faculty, innovation, and impact. Addressing anti-Black racism is a core part of this work, alongside our commitments to Indigenous reconciliation, gender equity, and representation across identities and experiences. It is important to recognize that histories of exclusion and resilience are deeply interconnected. Addressing systemic barriers, whether rooted in colonialism, enslavement, or racial injustice, demands integrity, bravery, commitment, and accountability. We advance this work through our teaching, our curricula, our research, our university operations, our hiring practices, our engagement with students and community partners. As a Faculty of Management, we believe that business schools have a responsibility to prepare students not just to respond to change and challenge, but to lead responsibly through disruption with awareness, vision, integrity, courage, and as I said before, resilience. Despite setbacks, leaders never quit. We never quit. And I'm pleased to share that at Desautels, we're growing our equity team. And Stephen DeFore-Wire, who's here, as well as Carrie Noel Ploman, are working in collaboration with the Office of Black Inclusion, Success and Strategic Initiatives, along too with H.J. Jung, who I see in the back, to help advance Black students across McGill, Black members of the community, and specifically, I know Carrie Noel is deeply involved in helping to develop a Black inclusion action plan for the 2026 to 2027 academic year. This month, I am participating in dialogues with Black students, with Black faculty, and with Black staff at Desautels. In some ways, I'm looking forward to listening, learning, and hearing their stories. In some ways, I'm dreading this. It's a very sober time. But this month is all about connection to, and as we heard earlier, uplifting activities, strengthening ourselves, dialogue. And there are many opportunities for us to engage with the events that are taking place in February here at McGill. Desautels will have a fireside chat with one of our alumni, Onela Gossa, on the 23rd. I invite you to be present. But for me, tonight's gathering is particularly significant. As McGill's Black History Month keynote event, this is an opportunity for us to come together to reflect, yes, on how far we have come or how far we came, but also on how much further we must go and the responsibilities we collectively share. So I'm honored to welcome our keynote speaker, Sabaa Quao. Sabaa brings a perspective shaped by creativity, entrepreneurship, and leadership, by moments of disruption, like the one we're probably all experiencing in different ways, not all in positive ways. Moments of disruption that demand imagination, courage, vision, and a determination to keep moving forward. His work challenges us to think critically about what we choose to fight for, what we choose to hold on to, what we choose to let go. Hopefully, as we all continue to imagine a more equitable future. And I thank Sabaa for sharing his story. I know it's so rich, and his experience and his wisdom with us today. I can't wait. So let me get out of the way and just thank a few people. I want to thank McGill's equity team in the Provost's office for partnering with Desautels. It's such an honor to serve as partner, and I'm deeply grateful that you allowed us to be your partner. There's so much care and planning that went behind this month's programming. I want to, in particular, draw attention to Linda Bulimo, Senior Advisor in Anti-Racism and Equity Education, for her leadership and her dedication. And I know in the background there are others that I just want to highlight. So Maurice Riley Case and Antoine Moffett-Alavo. And your partners in the equity team who work year-round to advance the Black community at McGill. And I want to recognize, before I close, the excellence of this community. The excellence of this community at Desautels, and more generally at this wonderful university. And we applaud, and we support, and we cheer on this resilient community. So now let's begin. Sabaa Quao.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. My father's here, McGill Med School class of '68. And lots of Quao graduates from McGill. My mom graduated from McGill. My older brother, my younger brother, and my niece would be here, but she's in class. So lots of history with McGill University, so it makes it an additional honor for me to be here. When I was asked to give this presentation, it's an interesting time to give a presentation like this because, as has been mentioned, we are in a period of disruption. And I happen to like periods of disruption because really they're opportunities. And when you think of the usual take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, the inversion becomes interesting. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a creative journey in terms of where and how that inversion works and what you can imagine going forward when we do get a chance to take 2 steps forward. Some people know who that character is, but I think everyone in this room knows what a lightsaber is. And it's interesting that you know what a lightsaber is without necessarily being a hardcore Star Wars fan. The other interesting thing about a lightsaber is you understand a lot about it in terms of the world that it comes from. And the lightsaber in one character's hand means one thing, but put the lightsaber in the hands of this other character that you might recognize, and it means something else. The other interesting thing about it is you understand the physics of a lightsaber. And if I said to you, can it cut through a piece of paper? Can it cut through a door? It's interesting how most people understand the physics, the narrative, the backstory behind this imaginary object. And what makes it interesting is, because everyone understands the logic, the narrative, the sound, if I go, you know what that is. That internal logic is something that is interesting because everyone comes along with an understanding of the whole picture of that universe. And it makes you wonder, how is it, whether, my kids are 18 and 19 and they've known what Star Wars was and what a lightsaber was since they were 5, 6, or 7. My parents may not be Star Wars fan, but they know what it is. So it's actually also intergenerational. Again, some kids have only watched the animated version. Some people have been to the theme parks. But it makes you wonder, how is it that you all know this so completely? And there's a branch of knowledge that really examines how is it that you come to know what you know, and how is it that you come to believe what you believe. And it's interesting to sometimes step back and understand how it is that you know something. And in those moments of reflection, you realize that there is a learning mechanism that is very efficient and works very well. So that's what epistemology is. This branch of knowledge that really does investigate how you come to know something. And it's interesting because there's a tension between things that you know versus things that you believe. We're in a period of time where even the word truth has become fuzzy. And I thought truth was something that we all understood. How is it that some people have come to believe a different truth than others? So there's a tension there. And it's not unusual for me to use the Star Wars analogy. Because 10 years ago, I was teaching a screenwriting class. And I was asked to come in and help the students understand how to build longevity into the things that they were creating. And there was an article that had been written in Wired magazine, and it said, even the founder or the creator of Star Wars and all the writers who work on Star Wars won't live long enough to see the last episode. So you think about this long arc of this narrative and this world that almost everyone in this room understands. And I taught the course, but that lesson stuck with me. And it doesn't matter whether I'm teaching a course on creative or a course on strategy or a lecture on economic models. It's not unusual for me to use this because it centers everyone in the room with a common base of understanding. That's a very powerful thing. And those of you who are fans of comic books or sci-fi or video games know that when I say the word world building, it's interesting what it means to those people. But everyone who isn't in that creative field also can imagine what world building is. Because when you build a world that has a logic, a narrative, a physics, does the sun rise in the east and set in the west? World building is a way that you can think about many other things. So even in my career building brands or helping companies launch products and services, I think about the coherence and the logic that I need to build into that brand in order for people to encounter it and start to understand it and for it to take on a life of its own without always needing to start from scratch. It would be exhausting if you always had to start from scratch. And so in order to do a good job, the best worlds that you can build are creative, are clear, and are compelling. But they're built on a vision, because when you start off on a creative project, you have a fuzzy understanding of where you're trying to go, so it is a vision. But to make it work, you actually have to become quite systematic in building all the logic for it to hold together. Otherwise, when someone enters into that world, it will fall apart very quickly. When you build a world and you've done a good job at it, it's interesting to see what happens when you first take a step back and reflect on the thing that you've built. And you take a step back, and you can all imagine, you take a step back and you think, I've done a good job, and this makes sense, and this is how this works. And you know that other people can participate in this same world. So take a step back as the first thing I want you to do. And I will use this metaphor to take you through where and how I think we need to contemplate how we take this moment of creative disruption and build something else. I'll give you a bit about my background, and it gives you a little bit of context of why I would approach this a little bit sideways. I have been a 30-year career, and mostly as a creative director or chief creative officer. And creativity is central to everything that I do. Even though I have studied business, I have a degree in design, I have got an MBA, and everyone says, is creativity the driver or the thing that holds together? And I say yes. It enables me to imagine anything I need to do. And creativity is something that I try to say, it's one thing when I talk to creative people about it, but what I need everyone to do is to understand the power of them being open enough to try something different. I've also built a lot of startup companies, and I advise a lot of startups. And it's interesting to think about what a founder does when they decide to start a business, because they start in on a world building exercise. And yes, they might be trying to build a piece of software or change an economic model or build a supply chain in a different way. But it also has to hold together with a kind of logic. It also has to address the world that we're in, even as they're trying to introduce new things into the equation and make it hold together. So I love this idea of creativity being applied to starting something new. And at the same time, even though creative disruption is what I call my starting assumption, it is quite interesting that even at this pivotal time, the 2025 Nobel Prize for Economics was won for a theory around creative destruction. And what that did was, we can say there's a certain amount of, at some point, your blockbuster video and Netflix comes along and you're swept out. We understand and recognize creative disruption happen all the time. But it's also another way to think about it in terms of it's actually necessary to go through that destruction process, and we're usually talking about it in the context of technology, but you actually can't get to the next stage without that destructive process. So there's a tension between creativity and things that you nurture, grow, and build with this destruction that has to happen, or we actually don't get ahead. So when we hit these inflection points like we're in now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's not a bad thing because some people address that opportunity differently. And as an entrepreneur, every time there's an opportunity to wedge your way in disruptively, an entrepreneur minimizes disruption and maximizes what they're going to do with that opportunity to create something new. So founders do this without thinking about it. You know, we joke about startups and founders being a bit delusional, but it's because they have this vision and they will minimize what they need to get over, minimize the obstruction. So I want you to remember that in terms of it doesn't mean that we're not facing obstructions and opponents, but I'm willing to bet that the opponents cannot stand because the force of creative destruction is greater than the resistance to change. So take a step back and reflect on that, because there's actually a bit of optimism that you can have the moment you think about it that way, regardless of the situation that we're in now. And when you take a step back, you can also break it down and think about it in different levels. You can think about what it feels like at a personal level when you take a step back. You can think about how we address things that happen in a society when we take a step back and reflect on where we're at. And it also happens on a very long arc at a civilizational level. So you can see how this process works whether you're dealing with short, medium, or long timelines. And we'll talk about timelines because that is, again, part of the problem that you have to solve when you're going through a period of disruption. So we'll go through a world-building exercise, and I'm going to give you some examples that ground it in terms of, first, what is personal. I've been a single parent most of the last 10 years, and my kids are now 18 and 19 years old. And those of us who have kids or nieces or nephews or godkids or grandchildren will recognize that you sometimes watch them as they're growing, and you take a step back because they are starting to become independent. And even as they're starting to go out into the world and move away from you, you take a step back and there's a moment of satisfaction. And it's a cumulative impact. I remember my kids and the milestones at 5, 6, and 7, different from 14 and 15, and now at 18 and 19. And you take a step back and it's a quiet contemplation, and it actually feels quite positive and quite good. So again, a very positive thing that happens and a stage of stepping back that everyone can empathize with and recognize and understand. And then we think at a societal level. Think about the advancements we've made in public health. Think about what it is to have vaccines that work. Think about the benefits of having proper maternal care and how there has been a reduction in childhood mortality. It doesn't mean the work is finished, but we can take a step back at this level in society and recognize that entire categories of things that we used to fear have receded into the background and receded from our daily consciousness because we have seen this progress. It's still unfinished, but you can take a step back and recognize that progress has been made. And then there's the long arc of human progress. And in that long arc, we recognize unmistakably that progress has been made, but sometimes you have to step back and be at a distance from it. And that distance might be decades, not days, in order to understand that that progress has been made. But again, whether I'm speaking about short, medium, or long, you take the same step back and your body does the same thing every time. What happens when you take that step? Your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, and you have some sense of satisfaction. And often with those steps back, it's loaded with a sense of meaning. And we've all been through, even though I might have described it a certain way for the first time, I think once again I'm building a world for you that you've understood the logic of what I've said and the steps that you've personally taken, and that this logic and this way of understanding the world and world building has worked for 100 different people, 100 different ways. So it tends to be a good system and an interesting way to think about the world. So then, there are other times you take a step back and you actually recoil. So we've had this vision that I've given you where you come out of it with ease, but in another world, there are things that happen that might startle you, that horrify you, and psychologically and somatically, you deal with it very differently. And so let's talk about the dark side, which is still very powerful. And in those moments, we can see that right now we're dealing with an erosion of institutional trust. I use that word, truth, that has become fuzzy. We take a step back and we say there are consequences for this step back, and we have to pause and think about it. We also are in a period where elections used to be a mundane, boring, and procedural thing. And now we have elections where it almost feels like each one is a kind of existential threat. How is it that something that was so consistent in terms of how we used to move forward has now become a point of tension and a point of anxiety at an election? And that's because we understand that elections have consequences. So I've set up this tension between our world building and say two things can exist at the same time. We can have a sense of progress that does coexist with unresolved injustice. And you've taken the same step back in order to be able to recognize that something does have to change. It has to change, but if we take forward momentum without reflecting on it, every one of us as a kid was told, look before you leap. There are consequences if we don't take that pause to then systematically think and plan how we're going to take those next two steps forward. So the pause is loaded now with a different meaning than what I described the first time. Reflect on that, and then you think about which side you'd rather be on, which world you'd rather build, and things that you don't necessarily want to go back to. And when I play with it that way, everyone starts to align with kind of wanting the same outcome of their world-building exercise. Now, another clean way I like to think about it is I like to think about world-building in 25-year timelines. Not only because it represents a generation, but because sometimes you realize that if something doesn't happen soon enough, you won't see it manifested in the world that your own children will live, see, and experience. So having an 18 and a 19-year-old, there are things that I will not accept to not happen in a 25-year timeline because I want to see my children in this world with certain things that we're encountering now that deserve to not continue. So a 25-year timeline is a good amount of time. If we think of everyone in this room, I don't know how young some of the younger students are, but some of us went through a period of creative destruction in the start of the digital era. And there were hundreds and then thousands of companies, hundreds of millions of dollars, all plowed into businesses, and 90% of them disappeared. But it's interesting what came out of it. A lot of interesting new things that we rely on and we take for granted today. And here we are in this period right now, and we're seeing the exact same cycle of companies and hype and building and anxiety, and also some resistance to change. So let's put that resistance to change into context if you don't accept it in a 25-year timeline. And I always look at this next number, and I'm always shocked, because each year at Davos, the World Economic Forum publishes how long it will take for women to achieve gender parity. 123 years. And for everyone else who represents a minority in any way, if 50% of the population cannot achieve gender parity and are being asked to wait 123 years, everyone else has to pause and think about how much harder it is when you're a smaller group than 50% of the population or a subset of that group. Then I have another number that's even more shocking. McKinsey, 2 years ago, published a study on how long it will take Black people to achieve equality and the same quality of life as their neighbor. 320 years. If anyone came to you and said, things are going too fast, I want you to slow down, it's too much, wait your turn. If anyone told you to wait 123 years for anything, you wouldn't take them seriously because they are not credible. Anyone telling me to wait 320 years when I've just told you exactly what I want to see happen in a 25-year period. As a creative person, 25 years is a lot of time to do a lot of things. But you immediately understand that if those numbers are put in front of you, there is nothing that you're seeing today that is either creative enough or aggressive enough, or that the opposition still says to you to wait 123 years. And everyone in this room knows in their gut that you have to reject those numbers. Not just for yourself, not just for your kids, not just for your grandkids. So what's the world that you want to build? At the same time, much as I like the destruction process, we have to preserve some parts of it because you have to build on a stable base. So whenever I'm coaching creative teams, I encourage a certain amount of chaos and destruction at the start of the process. But what makes us professionals is you still have to land the plane. You're still going to have to funnel down from the range of ideas that you go through, get systematic, build systems, build worlds, and still finish in a way that something can last. So what you build upon is worth consideration, even as part of the creative destruction process. And I think we need to think about which parts we want to keep. Now, resistance to change is natural, and it's a human tendency. But at some point, entrepreneurs do this all the time, you ignore the resistance to change, you ignore the hurdle, and you maximize the space of what you need to build. Because if we fall victim to this resistance to change, everyone has to think about this world-building exercise and start to understand what you don't get. So the survival instinct is more powerful than the resistance to change. And it's interesting, this word about survival, or I'll use the word that we use in other contexts around sustainability. If you imagine building a world and you want it to be sustainable, think of the things that you need to eliminate. But in the end, you want to survive, and civilization at its gut wants to survive. So I actually think it's inevitable that we move in the right direction. and that the forward motion is worth sustaining, because many of us are not going to ever go back to whatever 25, 50, 100, or 300 years ago. We are only going to accept or consider the way forward. And I think if everyone is in on the same world-building exercise, we actually all end up on the same page. Think of some of the things you see politically that people are resisting. But if they really paused and contemplated where they want to end up, you know, one of my favorite economic terms that popped up was pitchfork economics. You think of what happens if the imbalance is sustained for too long and the pitchforks come out. So the survival instinct, I think, is where everyone wants to acknowledge that if you follow that survival instinct, we are actually going to end up in a place that we want to be. I want to thank you for letting me take you on a bit of a sideways journey in order for us to understand the exercise that I think we all want to go through. And I want you to take the opportunity to realize that it's something that you can do on your own, in small and in big ways. There are basically 100 different lanes that we need to fill to get to that completed world that we all want to live in. So we all have some agency. We all can refuse to be victims. We all have a duty to refuse to be victims. And we all have to lean forward and get into that world-building exercise and get to that world that we want to build. Thank you.